Hello. I am Ben Pick, and thank you for joining me in a Running to Write, where I give questionable writing advice through writing metaphors. Tonight I'm talking 7 dystopian characteristics I don't like reading or watching. I expand this list beyond tropes, and technically some of the tropes I mentioned last week weren't really tropes anyways, but these are my lists, so these are my rules. Anyways, in the 2010s, I was burned out by dystopian stories. The Walking Dead had meandered past its pointless season 2 and was back to its great source material, except it didn't draw from there, or at least not well. The episodes turned minor details into season-long sprawls, and the episodes were unhopeful, dreary slogs until I felt like I was one of the Walking Dead, specifically a zombie. I meandered to my seat each week to find out how these terrible people were going to fail to improve the end of the world. Last week I was channeling REM by being upbeat and feeling fine about the end of the world as we know it. This week I'm going more like a character from Fahrenheit 451 where I'm burning books, or rather closing said books and never opening them again because they included these characteristics. When writing dystopian stories, I prefer that these are not included. Number 1, terrible character development. In stories, certain events need to happen. There needs to be conflict or drama thrown in the mix, otherwise, why are we reading it? To get to that point, characters need to make incompetent decisions or act against their own self-interests. This is particularly common in dystopian stories where they can get away with it by saying it's for their own desperation or survivability, but again, that goes against what they're actually doing. Breaking the characters in this way breaks the reality of the story. This goes way beyond the characters merely acting selfishly. My wife and I still make fun of Lori from The Walking Dead. No other character suffered such bad character assassination. She was driving on a straightaway with minimal obstacles and somehow flipped her car, which resulted in her getting bitten by a zombie and ultimately dying. She was the worst person on the show, and for a while the show improved because she was written out of it. Worse, Lori in the show wasn't nearly as irresponsible, helpless, or incompetent. The writers on the show made her that way to inject drama in and stretch out episode and season lengths without adding anything relevant or interesting. This leads me to number 2, nothing happened. There was a stellar moment in One Piece where Roronoa Zoro absorbed all the damage his captain had experienced in battle and stood there with a simple, nothing happened. He was beaten but not broken by one of these 7 warlords of the sea. No. This is season 2 of The Walking Dead, where they spent the first half of the season looking for a girl in their group who ended up being exactly where everyone assumed and said she was. Dystopian stories in particular are guilty of having nothing happen. It's common for characters to venture off seeking water only to discover their source is polluted and they return having achieved nothing. That could be fine. Those chapters or scenes were there to reveal something about the characters, possibly their backstory, or have them learn a new skill. The problem is when the characters learn something new and then immediately revert back to their baseline state. Or they aren't interesting, so I don't care whether they survive, or whether I find out what type of a person they were before the world was destroyed. When there are too many chapters or episodes that should have gotten giant red X's through them because they weren't relevant, well, that's a big reason why I stopped consuming dystopian media. I think The Walking Dead is finally over minus a few cash grab spin-offs. I haven't watched an episode in well over 5 to 7 years, but I believe I could pick up any episode from any season and not be lost because they all felt like more of the same. That stagnation can work in some sitcoms, but I want my characters to grow and evolve. Whether that's for better or worse, depends on the circumstances. Number 3, bad government. The story will convey some current allegory for our system, but do it terribly. In my last episode, I complimented The Hunger Games for how it conveyed the government in that story. Yet in its sequel and the 3rd book in that trilogy, it reversed everything and made that government seem rampantly incompetent in a way which broke the reality of the story for me and made me not want to finish that series. I finished them, but the holes stretched the realms of believability too far. The more the setting and the governing bodies were defined, the less realistic they were, and the more it took me out of the story. I know the whole point is that bad governments lead to revolutions. Yet in dystopian stories, it feels like they are fundamentally and logistically flawed in ways which would cause them to collapse on a weekly basis. Also, what happened to the world outside of Pan Am in the Hunger Games? I like to think that it's just North America which has fallen into disarray and then been quarantined by an otherwise stable and functional planet. I'm okay with a dystopian story where it's a series of warlords who are taxing their people too heavily. I'm not okay with red tape or stereotypical generic government problems which would lead to an immediate breakdown in communications and the inability of that leader to maintain their power. In other words, not only are these dystopian stories like the one in the Hunger Games bad, but they fall apart under the smallest amount of scrutiny. Number 4, romance. Sure, in a dystopian story, love and procreation should be a priority. However, that shouldn't be the only thing the characters care about. Some of the worst and most unhealthy love triangles I can think of exist in dystopian stories. When the hero's choices are bad or worse, that's not love, that is desperation. And it's made worse when one or both sides of the love triangle routinely commit war crimes. In my opinion, the more dystopian story shifts from survival to romance, the further it falls. Number 5, hopelessness. I get it, the end of the world happens for a reason and there shouldn't be a way back. There needs to be, though, a way to survive and at least a path to achieving a stable society. Otherwise, the journey is pointless because it's obvious within moments of the story ending, the characters are about to die. I watched Snowpiercer with my wife and she still gives me crap about choosing that movie. I agree, it is terrible. The remains of humanity die in a train crash, all except for a teenage girl and a child boy. As the camera pans out, we can see a hungry polar bear in the background. Even if the two are able to survive, the society that gets recreated will be inbred, and it will take generations upon generations to relearn what was lost. That is not a fulfilling ending, even if you factor in the Adam and Eve connotation. The writers decided to, in actuality, create a hopeless situation mixed in with uncomfortable romance. There's another dystopian story I read in the past few years where we're following a character on their journey, and they get a sudden love interest. I know there were foreshadow hints about that love interest, but whatever. It still was sudden and tacked on at the end. Anyways, just as suddenly that character gets a bullet to the chest because they and we as the reader cannot have nice things. Not only was that not a good twist meant to rob the hero from their saccharine ending, it felt like a giant middle finger from the writer to us and made the ending utterly hopeless. There's more to that ending, but I didn't care, and honestly hadn't cared what happened to those selfish characters for a long time. Number 6, Prophecies. I've gone on a long rant about using prophecies in storytelling, and you can find that right here. In my opinion, prophecies are a lazy crutch for writing an uninteresting story. To have a prophecy come true at the end of the world means that the end of the world was preordained. Ignoring that massive rabbit hole, this means the characters had no agency or choice. They were running on a path that cannot be changed. In other words, boring. And lastly, number 7, no individuals. Everyone in the dystopian society is the exact same. They think the same, they talk the same, they act the same, except our protagonist. They're unique. There's a dystopian series about a hero who is 2 types of things when their society is built to handle people who are only 1 type of thing. That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. What that means is that almost all the characters are likely static, and that the hero is, at best, abrasive, and at worst, outright obnoxious. I'm dancing around what dystopian series this is because I refuse to read it as it sounds like absolute trash. Everything I've heard about it has yet to change my mind. Those are my 7 dystopian characteristics which I will never write, and tend to avoid reading or watching stories which include them. I am Ben Pick, and thank you for joining me in Running to Write. If you enjoy my bad lessons learned from dystopian stories, please press those like and subscribe buttons. Let me know in the comments what you enjoy reading in your dystopian stories. Do you agree with my opinions, or is everything I said wrong? I post my running and writing progress on Instagram and Twitter as Running to Write, so be sure to follow me and join in with your own thoughts. Don't forget to sign up for the Running to Write monthly newsletter for regular updates on my sort of musings, pitfalls, and lessons learned. The link is in the description below. This episode was sponsored by the incredibly talented Richard Holiday. I'm not sure if he wants to be associated with such a pessimistic episode, yet here we are. If you want your praises sung or wish to sponsor an episode of Writing to Write, check out my Ko-fi page. You can also get outtakes to my videos, and trust me, there were a lot of F-bombs tonight. See you next time. Until then, have a palate cleanser by reading your favorite dystopian story, one you will always like.